It's 12 o'clock and time to get started again. A lot lately has happened in Washington with federal transportation funding and policy. And joining us to talk about it is our number one advocate in D.C., Scott Bogren, the Executive Director of CTAA. Scott's been with CTAA since 1988. He and I were hired within 1 month of each other into the transit industry, and we've been good friends ever since. His work has always focused on building and promoting safe, affordable, accessible, and inclusive mobility for all Americans. He's passionate about community transportation, and he takes transit every day. Please welcome Scott Bogren.
Is that working? All right, good. Well, thank you so much, and thanks, Ann, for the invite. It's been a while since I've been in Arkansas, so I appreciate being here. It was 28 degrees when I left D.C. Yesterday morning, so once we landed in Little Rock, Karen and I were like, oh, this feels real nice. I did not tell my wife that it was nice and warm down here, though. I think what we want to talk about today is, and something you probably never should talk about on a full stomach, is stuff going on in D.C. But I want to assure you that I've been doing this for 33 years. The last 2 years have just been crazy. So many things that have happened that were and are unprecedented, things I never thought I would live long enough to see. And so what I wanted to do in this session is remind us of what we've all kind of gone through the last 3 years. I did it in a timeline that you'll see, and then try to get a sense of the more important things is what's next. And what can you, as people who operate transit systems of different sizes, rural, we got some urbans, we got some folks that are serving people with disabilities, older adults, probably some non-emergency medical transportation operators in the room. By the way, all those, what I just meant, that's our core membership. As an organization, we have about 1,200 members around the country, and they do what you do. And we try to make sure in DC that the decision makers understand that there's more to public transportation than the metro system in Washington, than New York City, that eats up a lot of time and energy, trust me, and that all Americans, rural and urban alike, paid into the federal gas tax, so they all ought to have something coming back to them that allows them to have the right size forms of public transit that meet their needs. And so we'll start in 2016, and that was when the last transit authorization passed. Was known as the FAST Act. It was, and it's important to keep that date in mind, 2016, and you'll see why. Between 2016 and 2020, we had a period of time where ridership nationally was kind of going down a little bit, and we were really, CTAA was doing a lot of work on right-sizing regulations, again, with the understanding that most of you don't have massive HR departments and massive proposal writing departments and and then we got to 2020 and the pandemic hits. Previous to the pandemic, things like modernizing our fleets, CTAA was really, we really took up the charge in 2012 when we recognized that if we don't make Congress aware, they're going to give away all the discretionary capital investments to rail, which they did in 2012. And we reminded them that at the time when they made that decision, 52% of the transit trips that happened in the country happened on a bus. And with changes they had made, 8% of the dedicated capital was for bus operators and 92% was rail. That was an issue. Many of you probably remember we were starting to talk about service redesigns. How do we make transit more easier for the passengers to get on and off, to know where the bus is, you know? We were in an era where these disruptors, largely Uber and Lyft, suddenly arrived in urban America, and if you would listen to them, you would believe that they can just do everything and would replace public transit. Nothing could be further from the truth, and we can talk about some of those issues as well. But that's kind of what we were dealing with. Then the pandemic hits. And I remember in March of 2020, I got a bunch of calls from varying congressional offices. We're working on emergency appropriations. What are your members going to need? And it was a really open-ended question, which concerned me, because you never want to say a number that's too low. So we went and looked at spend downs, looked at 5311, we looked at small urban and some of the spend downs. And I remember we came back, and at that point in time, Congress was operating under the theory that the pandemic would be over around the end of September 2020. So we just need to get things through to the end of the federal fiscal year. We'll be good. Chris Zeilinger on our staff came back and he said, well, for rural, for 5311, we think 400 million would be the right number. And we had a lot of, as you can imagine, Excel spreadsheets and stuff to back up that number. 2 days later, they called and they said, well, what about 2 billion? And I called Chris and I was like, did we get like a zero out of order or add one in somewhere on what we had said? But what really that told me was Congress, the only thing they could see to do throughout the pandemic was throw money at the problem. There was no policy being written that made any sense. And it really allowed some systems, I think, to get greedy, and we didn't like that optic. And the CARES Act passed with that number in there. And you know, the two things that, as they started to debate it, that we kept coming back is it's got to be 100% federal. You can't drop this kind of money into the system and expect the systems then to come up with a 50-50 operating match on that. And they said, yep. And then the other thing that we negotiated around was no end date. That I've been around the block. I remember 2008 and 2009 and the economic downturn that happened there and how long it took smaller communities to rebound from that. And just our thinking was we need some extra years here for these communities to rebound. So it passed $25 billion for public transportation, off budget, not budgeted for, all arriving at 100% federal. and with no end date. And I mean, honestly, I was like, I did not think I would live long enough to see that take place. It was crazy. So we get into that first kind of second quarter, the first half of the year in 2020, and you all experienced this. Like, it's going to last a week, oh, it's going to last a month, like, is it ever going to end? Was kind of how we all kind of progressed through that. And ridership went in the tank around the country, and most of it, the goal there was survival. How do we make sure that our agencies can survive this, our members can survive this? And then we started to get a turn that summer, and you started to realize, okay, there are things that we need to do. So safety protocols, wearing masks, the whole issue of cleanliness. I tell this story because I think it really speaks to urban transit, big urban transit. The 13th of March was the last day CTAA's offices were opened in 2020. And I left the office about 6 o'clock. It was a Friday. And if you've been, our offices are right near Metro Center, and I went down the escalator, and I put my hand on the escalator rail, and it was like wet. And I was like, ugh. There's somebody at the bottom of the escalator, and this was Washington Metro's solution to being clean, who had boxes and boxes of wet wipes. And he was standing at the bottom of the escalator just running the wet wipe on it until that one ran out. And then he was getting another one. And I just thought, well, that's a real common sense solution to what we're facing. But we didn't know. There was a lot we didn't know at that time. And the safety stuff, we started to understand. Initially, it was like, oh, you got to wipe down everything. And then a couple months later, it was, no, it really doesn't get transmitted. It's mostly through the air. So we got to deal with air circulation on our vehicles. I remember the FTA telling us that no matter what, we should tell all of our members that the windows in the back of the bus had to be open. And it's like, we have members in Alaska, that's not going to work. You know, I think we need to think about a better solution than that. And then we also started to see a lot of you switched over to delivering meals and prescriptions and groceries, and like, it was amazing to watch the smaller agencies just pivot, because that's what you guys always have done really well, is figure out what's going on in the community and serve the community. And I remember calling FTA, and they said, well, these are incidental uses of vehicles. You're really not supposed to be using federally funded vehicles for this. And I was like, do you want to tell them that? I suggest you give them some flexibility on your incidental usage rules right now. We also learned a lot about the bravery of our drivers to go out and do the work they did. 600 transit drivers died. So if you don't think it's real, it was very real. And 600, too many. And we had managers. CTAA had a board member pass away. It was scary. The other thing we learned about essential, it kind of all got redefined, right? Like, initially we were all thinking, we all knew what essential workers were. They were people in fire and rescue and medical. All of a sudden now it was somebody willing to work at the grocery store so the grocery store could stay open. It was a whole new understanding of what essential in the community really meant. Definitely we saw that. And we saw a lot of you start to work with public health and healthcare and others and create new partnerships, which was really great to see. And again, something I totally expected, having worked with this industry for a long time. So near the end of 2020, you get another bill passes. And this one was a little bit wonky. The big urbans didn't like how much money in CARES Act had not gone to them, so they created a really complicated formula that shifted money away. And so, you know, instead of all 50 states getting rural funds, we had 22, and 28 got nothing. And I and others have tried to unwind that formula, and it was expertly put together. I can assure you. But it was, again, now another $14 billion. And we started to see the beginning of, and this is an important piece for where we're headed, we started to see travel pattern changes. And that started to put the onus on you all as transit executives, as leaders in your community, to start to figure out and look at these things and go, is this change permanent or is it temporary? And every community is different. But that was a clear piece that we started to see happen. Then we had also an election, a new president comes in, he passes another $30 billion for transit. All told, $70 billion coming into public transit, off budget, at 100% federal. Only the last piece had a time limit. And in the work up to the bill that just passed, we had to answer for that. And it wasn't always an easy thing to answer. My answer became, as CTAA, 5% of that 70% went to rural. That's it. And 4.8% went to small cities, under 200,000. So, Mr. or Mrs. Senator or Congressman, if you're really upset about all this money that went to transit, we're not the ones you should be upset with. There are other entities and other associations in Washington that you should be talking to, but that's not us. But it became clear that that was going to be a problem. Around this same time, we started to see, we knew, CTA, that when so many people couldn't get out for a meal, for groceries, when the vaccine became available, those same people were going to need help getting access to the vaccine, or you're going to need to figure out ways to bring the vaccine to them, for those who would want to take it. And we knew that was coming. The two things we thought, but continue to be a real issue today, are your first session all morning, driver shortages. Never seen anything like what we've been dealing with. And unfortunately, they don't seem to want to make decisions that make it any easier on us to find new drivers. And the supply chain issues. We started to understand that that was going to take some time. So that takes us through to the end of 2021, last December, and we get this new bill that passes. We call it the IIJA. The FTA calls it the BIL, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. Those two are the same. It used to be nice when Congress would at least come up with acronyms like ICE-T or things you could say. Now we have these. But it included record amounts of additional investment in public transit. For a 5-year bill. And the other issue was, because Congress is broken, we can't have substantive discussions about policy. We can only throw money at things. So when we got to this point, a few senators and the administration really hijacked the whole process of creating this bill. And one of the rules was no policy changes. The reason that's bad is because that basically guarantees that all the policy for public transit is based on a bill that was put out in 2015 and 2016. And we all know the world has changed quite a great deal since 2015. So the upshot of all this is where you start to get to the future. We all lived through this. And I don't think we make enough about, as folks who are making decisions about putting drivers out every day, who are dealing with all of these funding challenges and these new demands, how stressful the last 2 years have been on all of us in this room. And Karen's discussions, I think, are so spot on about how to rethink things, but it's so hard to think creatively when you're just dealing with one crisis after the other, after the other. And that's what we've been dealing with. So let's talk about some ridership data, because I want to make a point here. And that is one that will resonate with you. This data, I compared December 2021 to December 2019. So pre-pandemic to kind of near the beginning of the end of the pandemic, let's hope. Heavy rail, subway, down 59%. Light rail, down 61%. Commuter rail, 70%. All bus is down about 50. Demand response is down about 41. Some other data points to kind of look at. These are some systems, just to give you a sense. Commuter rail in DC going from Maryland into Washington, DC, in December had recovered 11% of its ridership pre-pandemic. SciRide, that's a small urban system, probably like yours, Adam. They're in Ames, Iowa, serving Iowa State University. They're down 8%. Bus rapid transit down 43%, and then the big one, rural, only down 27%. This is telling us something. And what I think it's telling us is we have gone through 60 years of the United States government investing in public transit, and those investments being largely based on getting people from the suburbs into city to work. That's going to change and has changed permanently. And if your job is to run a fixed rail system, and let's underscore that word fixed, and you have suddenly 2 days a week, every federal employee is teleworking, you just lost 40% of your fare box recovery. And is that going to come back? Yeah, I wouldn't bet on it. Rural only down 27%. I would have members of Congress ask me why. Why are your systems reporting such high ridership? And I'd say, well, you can't telework a dialysis trip. It kind of has to happen. And so what this tells us is those traditional transit systems are going to have some real challenges ahead of them. I ride the Washington Metro subway into work every day, and I see less than half the riders that I used to see. And I don't know how many are going to come back. And it's fixed. It can't be moved to go where people have gone, different commutes. So some of the issues that these things then are telling us, how do we talk about what we do? How do we start to really articulate the value of public transit? And one thing for sure to me is we used to only talk about our business around how many people I served. We are not in a volume business anymore. We're in a value business, and we've got to speak about the value of the trips that you're making. And that's the point to make with elected officials at every level. The next thing is fixed versus flexibility. You all get that one, right? We need to be flexible right now. And just as Karen was talking about the ways in which we need to be flexible in how we are attracting frontline workforce, we also need to be flexible in how we're serving our communities. I think there is a pivot that's going to happen with public transit. And for smaller systems out here, that pivot is going to mean you're going to need to bring more customer-friendly technology to the game. You're going to have to be able to say to your systems, you don't have a 48-hour advance notice anymore. You have a 15-minute advance notice. Because you know what? That changes someone's life. And I just ask any of you, I was working with one of our members in New Jersey. They had a 72-hour advance notice for any trip. And they deployed some technology about a year ago that put them at about 18 minutes. And when you talk to their passengers, they were like, my whole life changed. They were older adults, all of them. I can go to the movies now. I could call up a friend and meet them for dinner. Try to live your life 72 hours in advance. So for a lot of you in the room, that's what I'm talking about with the flexibility. For fixed route operations, that means if you're doing hour headways, you got to look at that really closely and explore, are there better ways to serve that part of my community that will attract more riders than something, again, this is my take. When you get over an hour headway, you're only going to get people riding who have absolutely no other way to go. And that's not a good marketing strategy. We're here for those of you who have no other way to go. The value, the fix and the flex. I also think there's going to be this pivot towards discretionary trips. If you're in an urbanized area, that means here in Little Rock, how do I get away from just doing a commute pattern that isn't going to return? And how do I start to serve people on the weekends, in the evenings? How do I start to serve areas that I can see are really building ridership? And getting out of the mentality of like, we put public transit out there, it's fixed in every way, and now it's on you, the riding public, to figure out how you get to what we do. As opposed to, and what Uber and Lyft did well was say, we'll adjust the system to your needs. Forever, the number one concern has always been in a meeting like this, money. Well, we're kind of awash in cash. I almost hate to say that because I never thought I would say that. But more and more of our members are telling me that's not my concern. Frankly, we'll talk about it, it's the non-federal share that's the concern. And that's a reality across all of these things. And then the reality of COVID, which is it's not going to go away. So we have to figure out ways to live with it, to work within it. Now, I don't think we've done a good job of this. I lost my mind 2 weeks ago when they extended the mask mandate on public transit. I have to tell you, I was so furious. And I called up the FTA leadership and I said, did I miss a study or creditable research that said the virus has spread on public transit? Well, no. Well, another month of the mask mandate, and I said, look, CTAA, before you guys made the mask mandate, we were telling our members in the middle of the teeth of the pandemic, wear masks. We are not on the political side on either side of that. We're on the safety side. But the optics now are we're somehow dirtier than everything else. No, it's true. I took the subway to a hockey game, had to wear my mask to come out of the subway and into an 18,000-seat arena where it was wall-to-wall with people, and we were fine to not wear a mask there. And it really, really aggravated me. The only thing I can tell you is, unfortunately, our friends at TSA don't want to write multiple sets of rules, so they just lump us in with the airlines. So the rules for the airlines, they apply to us. And in case you're wondering, in several meetings, I have asked them point blank, when's the last time you were on a bus? You are aware it's not at 35,000 feet. It's on the ground. So the reality, and why I don't like the mask mandate, is because it delays the time in which all of us need to spend our energy right now figuring out how to work with the virus, how to be able to serve people effectively, knowing that there will be additional variants. And it further turns this whole thing political, because everything is political, at a time when it should be driven by science and data. I'll get off my soapbox. So what are the next steps? Well, I learned this morning I'm going to be in a hearing testifying in front of the Senate Banking Committee. I'm sorry, I don't want to get, that's my, next week on equitable implementation of the IIJA. So just to give you a sense of like, what are we going to be asking for? I want continued set-asides in all of their programs for rural and small cities so that rural systems compete with other rural systems for money, not with New York and Chicago and those. We successfully argued to get 25% of the previously battery bus capital program to be able to be spent on low emission vehicles, CNG, propane, a lot of the things, because there just aren't that many vehicles out there for rural America that are battery electric that can work. And I remain concerned about the ranges on the batteries. And also, God, they're so expensive. So that's an issue we're certainly going to raise when we talk about the equitability, the non-federal share. So we are going to push for any operator, 200,000 population and below, who operates fewer than 100 buses, to all their operating funds to be 80-20 and not 50-50. And move that forward. Yeah, we'll see. There's no guarantee on any of this, but I think we've got both Republicans and Democrats lined up supporting that. We had that support in the creation of this bill, and if it had gone through any normative process, we would have gotten it in the bill. We had it in an amendment once it changed. And Senator Toomey from Pennsylvania would not hear of it, unfortunately. So he just would not accept any amendments, including ours. But I think it's important because with these increases, we're just really concerned that we're going to leave money on the table because we can't match things, and then Congress is going to interpret that to mean they don't need it. And those are all bad outcomes for us. Yes, sir.
I just wanted to add, you mentioned earlier comparing us to Ames and being a small urban system. It's one of the ironies of the current funding formula. We're actually 5307 large urban.
Okay.
And so just like the smaller cities and towns have that challenge competing with the large, we, include ORT and Rock Region in that same boat.
Yeah.
We don't have the ability to compete with Kansas City, Austin, San Antonio, Houston, that have the local base to and resources to compete for those larger dollars.
Yep.
So I would say, in that similar type situation, those large urbans that everybody assumes are small urbans need to be considered as well, because we don't have the staffing to keep up with the policy requirements either.
Oh, it's getting worse. We talked a lot to Congress about the fleet transition plans that you had to put together.
Yeah.
As a perfect example. And finally, we got the FTA to tell me you can just do a 2-page fleet transition plan.
But it's written into the law.
Yeah, it is in the law. Yeah. Yes, sir.
So real quick, Scott, just want to make a comment on volume versus value and fix versus flex. I came to the realization late last year that I can no longer comfortably report that I have X amount of people that I'm delivering on a monthly basis. That what I should be reporting is that I've delivered X amount of people to X amount in value of jobs that they've gone ahead and put back into the community through their payroll taxes, purchasing, that type of thing. I'm still trying to figure out that calculation, because I think showing that value of transit versus the fact that I took 22 people to X location. I mean, that's just it's just a dumb number.
Yep.
On the fix versus flex, we recently switched over to a microtransit, and we were getting a lot of pushback from some of the people that were used to scheduling their trips out. Well, you schedule your trip out, you're not feeling well, you have to cancel your trip. Now you go into our cancellation policy. Using this new app, you have the flexibility to choose to go when you feel like going and not having to go when you don't feel well. So we've sold it that way, and it's worked wonders.
We're all going to have to adopt technologies that can help us do that and make what we do more relevant to the customers. It's so obvious. If we don't do that, if the whole paradigm of transit becomes how quickly can we get back to what we were doing in 2019, we're going to fail. I'm just telling you that. Like, that shouldn't be your goal. It's just like with the big urban systems, they're going to spend a lot of money trying to talk those white-collar commuters in big cities back onto their buses and trains. And they're going to miss the point, which is who's been riding your system throughout the pandemic. Those should be your core customers. Bring your innovation to them, because they're going to continue to ride. But for those folks, it's a really hard transition. I think for our smaller agencies, we're used to changing quickly. We're used to having really good, effective dialogue with the community. And that can't be more important than it is right now. And that's going to fall on all of you as local leaders to make those decisions. And the good thing is you're going to have some funding to do it. So the bad news is we're still small. You get one shot at this probably. So make sure it's the right one. I know some of my colleagues were here from our National Center on Applied Transit Technology. That's what we're trying to do, is help people make the best possible decisions on technology. And we're not talking driverless cars, all that kind of stuff. We're talking about ways that people can see a vehicle on a phone and ways that you can more easily bill and interpret what your trips are, ways that you can interpret the value of a work trip, of a medical trip, of a senior trip, that can speak to what you're doing.
I agree, because the challenge now is the costs are still there, and the value to put the frequency on the road, that cost is still there, and now we're still fighting the ongoing battle. We're spending all this money and nobody's on the bus.
Yeah.
But if you don't put the buses out there, not to mention if you have drivers to do that, you're not providing that value.
Yeah. Well, and think about it. If I had come down here in 2018 and I had said, in the next 3 years, our business is going to lose 75% of our customers. And at the same time, you're going to see more money from the federal government than anybody has ever seen. You all would have laughed me out of here and kicked me out and said, he's finally lost it. But that's what happened. That's what we're trying to figure out right now. And, the last thing I'll say is it's really a privilege for Karen and myself to kind of work with you. And I hope that that's the way this is always viewed. We don't want to be people in D.C. who never actually have good conversations and an understanding of what it means to provide a dialysis trip in rural Arkansas. The minute we lose that, we lose who we are as an organization at our core. So it's really a privilege, and the work that all of you have done over the last 3 years has been heroic. And your reward for that is a lot of challenges. But they're good challenges. And they're ones that we feel very confident that you're up for, because you've always gone through these things in the past, and this one's bigger than the other ones, but we want to be here to help you. So that's my direct line, my cell phone, and my email. If you email me anything, I will respond. I'll pick up the phone. And if you're in DC, we'd love to have you come visit with us. And tell our staff about what you do. I had 2 of my staff down here last week. Karen and I are here this week. We're committed to what the work you're doing and trying to make sure that you can continue to serve your community. So thanks for what you've all done over the last 2 years and what you continue to do. And thanks, Ann, for the chance to chat about some of these issues with you.